I want to begin this morning with some thank yous and also an apology. We'll start with the thank yous. Thank you is to all of our sponsors this morning, Shiur. This morning, Shiur is co-sponsored by Dina and Saul Kazovitz in commemoration of the upcoming yard site of Dina's father, Avi Blumenfeld, Avram Yosef ben Yisrael Shalom, Zichron Bracha. It is co-sponsored by Mindy and Henry Orlinsky, Nechama and Danny Sachs, and by Randy and Ari Wartelski, Lezecher Nishmas, Malka Parabas Yitzchak Yaakov, whose yard site is tonight. Really, thank you to all of our sponsors. My apology is to all of you for the fact that you're hearing me this morning as opposed to Rav Shai Schechter Shlita. We were, of course, very excited to hear from Rav Shai this morning. Unfortunately, he had to be at a funeral. We can't plan for these things. He had to be at the funeral of Anisha Chashuva, Rebbetzin Mimi Melman, who passed away, a very important figure in the Woodmere community. I will just say as well that on a personal note, I happen to be close with a number of her grandchildren. One of her grandchildren was an old chavrusa of mine in the Morasha Kollel, and actually my former president at the Albert Einstein College of Medicine. Her grandson Jonathan is a member of our extended B'nai Yeshurun family. So our learning this morning should be a Lezecher Nishmasa, should be an Ilui Neshama for her as well. Our topic this morning is Pidyon Haben. Now, right off the bat, let me ask you, what is the connection between Pidyon Haben and this week's Parsha? What's the relationship between Pidyon Haben and Parshas Vayigash? The answer is absolutely nothing, but I didn't know I was giving the shiur this morning, so I had to prepare something. So I actually will share with you that the shiur idea came from a shiloh that came up actually just last night. What happened last night? Last night, a wonderful young man from our Kehila, Elliot Holzer, a real Ben Torah, reached out. Well, he didn't reach out last night. He reached out a little while ago with the following shiloh. He, Baruch Hashem, just had a baby boy, and he had to fulfill the mitzvah of Pidyon Haben. Pidyon Haben doesn't always happen when you have a new baby boy. I have a firstborn boy, but my wife Rina is a Bas Levi, so we didn't make a Pidyon Haben. There are lots of other reasons why you may not be making a Pidyon Haben, but in his instance, he was indeed going to make a Pidyon Haben. But he looked at the calendar, he did the calculation. Ordinarily, we do Pidyon Haben on the morning of day 31 after a child's birth, and that came out to December 25th. It came out to this morning. For a variety of reasons, it was going to be very, very difficult for the family to do the Pidyon this morning. Again, we don't need to get into all the details. It was going to be very difficult for them to do it this morning. So they wanted to do the Pidyon last night. And the shaila was, is it okay to do a Pidyon Haben on the night of 31 rather than the day of 31? Of course, in halacha, night always precedes the day. So the question was, can we just do it a little bit early on the night of 31, even though there's a general minhag to do it on day 31? So it's quite an interesting shaila. Of course, the fact that this all happened last night indicates a spoiler that of course we paskin that they can do it, but it was indeed a shaila. I spoke to my Rabbi Mordechai Willig about it, and he told me that he felt it was absolutely okay. It was absolutely mutter. And again, we'll go through some of the halachic nuances in a moment. But he also shared with me that many years ago he had a similar scenario when he was a young rabbi in Riverdale. His first time dealing with a shaila like this, he paskined that it could be done on the night of 31 in the evening before we traditionally make a Pidyon Haben. And he said that he got a nice Misha Berach from Ramosha Tendler, Zachron Levracha, who did not approve of that psak and felt that that's not when it should be done. So it is indeed a matter of halachic controversy, even though, again, I paskin, in accordance with my Rebbe, that it can be done on the night of 31. It isn't so simple. So what I want to do is talk about how we calculate the shaila. We'll talk about some of the conceptual halachic background and basis for it, and then we'll try to expand the conversation to talk about some of the broader thematic, theological themes, the broader hashkafic themes of Pidyon Haben, and what they mean for our Avodas Hashem as a whole. If you look in source number 1, Bamidbar Perek Yudches, source number 1, as we'll see, is just one of a number of psukim in the Torah that record this mitzvah of Pidyon Haben, called Peta Rechem L'chol Basar Asher Yakrivu L'Hashem Ba'adav B'Behema Yeh Lach Ach Padot Tivteh Es Bechor Ha'adam Es Bechor Ha'Behema Tme'ah Tivteh. All firstborn are yours, says the Torah. But when it comes to your firstborn child, and as it happens, your firstborn behema temeya, your firstborn donkey, that's the mitzvah petach hamor, which we will not get into this morning. But in those instances, you need to engage in a pidyon. You need to do some kind of redemption. Of course, again, we know the procedure. You take 5 sla'im. In our minhag, there's this whole dialogue that's recorded, this choreographed dialogue between the father and the kohen by blessed Tvei. Which one do you want? And he gives him the 5 sla'im. Okay, so again, all of that is a rich discussion in its own right, but you have to engage in this ceremony of pidyon, of redeeming the child. And when do you do so? The very next pasuk declares, source number 1 in bold, Ufdu yav mi ben chodesh tifteh. You redeem the child when the child is 1 month old. Be'erkecha, hold on to that word for a moment, with the value. What's the value? Kesef chamesha shekalim b'shekel kodesh tzemkirahu. You have 5 shekel, what we call 5 slayim. That's the silver amount that is needed in order to do the pidyon. But the timing, as indicated by the pasuk, is mi ben chodesh tifteh. The child should be 1 month old. How exactly do you calculate these 30 days? So here we come to a major machlokas among the achronim, which in turn I will argue is rooted in a machlokas among the rishonim before them. If you look at source number 2, the Bach says as follows: B'tzarech lifdoso b'yom shloshim be'echad. You need to do the pidyon on day 31, even though mi ben chodesh, in a month in halacha, is never 31 days. It's either 29 or 30 days. When we say mi ben chodesh tivdeh, that means after the completion of the month, i.e., you should do the redemption on day 31. And if you jump the gun and you did the redemption too early, if you did it on day 30 or on day 29, day 28 to 27, if you did it early, then the pidyon is no good. Bold of source number 2. Even though I just told you a second ago that you have to do the pidyon on day 31, it doesn't really need to be day 31. The Bach says as follows: day 31 is a general guideline for you. It's a safe time to do pidyon haben. But really, there's no intrinsic or inherent significance to day 31. What is significant? The child needs to be 1 month old. Uftu yav mi ben chodesh tifteh. The child needs to be 1 month of age. How do we determine 1 month of age? So here we get into a calculation that is known as me'es le'es. That's a phrase, a halachic, a piece of halachic parlance or phraseology that we're going to be employing over the course of the morning. What does me'es le'es mean? When it comes to halacha, there are 2 ways of calculating time. One is just by objective halachic days. The other is by not by days on the calendar, but by time interval. Let's contrast bris milah on the one hand and the Bach's depiction of pidyon haben on the other. When it comes to bris milah, we know that a bris milah is done when? On day 8. How do we calculate day 8? Is there any difference between a child born at the very beginning of the day or a child at the end of the day? For bris milah's purposes, it doesn't make a difference. We're not actually measuring the age of the child. It is on the 8th halachic day of the child's life. That is when you do the bris milah. If the child was born in the first minute of the day or the child was born in the last minute of the day, they're going to have their bris at the same time. Again, it's not about how long the child has been on this earth. It's about, halachically speaking, day 8 of the child's life. That is when you do the bris milah. By contrast, the Bach is arguing, when it comes to pidyon haben, it's not objectively day 31 on the halachic calendar of the child's life. You need to take a month's worth of time. How much is a month in the lunar cycle? Al pi halacha, it is roughly 29 days and 12 hours. That's why some months are 29 and some months are 30, because when it's 29 and 12 hours, you end up with a calendar that intersperses months with 29 days and 30 days. So the Bach says you have to look at the time the child was born. If the child was born at the very end of the day, then the time for pidyon will be later. If he was born at the beginning of the day, then it will be earlier. The key is just to make sure that the child has been alive for that requisite 29 days and 12 hours. That is the opinion of the Bach.
Wouldn't it be the opposite? If it's a 12-hour thing, then day would be night, night would be day.
Halacha starts with night, for sure.
No, when you say the 29 and a half, so then technically if it was the child was born at 6 p.m., then on some later day it would be 6 a.m. when half the day.
Correct. Exactly. Yeah, he would have to be alive for 29 days and 12 hours. In that scenario, your first, according to the Bach, your first opportunity to do pidyon haben would be at 6 a.m. Exactly. Halachically calculated, of course, but yes, in principle. Okay? Just finishing the Bach after the ellipsis. It's not exactly 12 hours, it's 12 hours plus 793 halakim. That we're certainly not going to get into now. In short, as long as he has been alive for that month of time, that is when you are obligated. If you look at the Shulchan Aruch, source number 3, Eina b'chor ra'u lepidyon ad sheya'avru olav shloshim yom, ve'achar shloshim yom yiftenu miyad, shelo yesh ha'mitzvah, v'mchal yom lamed aleph liyos b'Shabbos, ein poden oso b'Shabbos el yamtin ad yom echad. That's going to be an important halacha that forms the basis of source number 4. The Shulchan Aruch says, wait until day 31. He does not tell us how exactly to calculate day 31. He tells us if day 31 falls out on Shabbos, then what do? You wait until after Shabbos. And the Shach, who follows the opinion that we saw in source number 2, the Shach and the Bach are of one mind on this issue, qualifies the Shulchan Aruch. Source number 4, Ela she'ein noagin liftos ad yom lamed aleph, v'hainu heicha de'efshar. Aval heicha dekalu chav test yud beis tavshin tzadi gimel kodem haShabbos yesh liftoso b'yom vav. Says the Shach. Let's say there's a scenario. Again, the Shach says ideally wait till day 31. But let's say there's a scenario where day 31 falls out on Shabbos, but those 29 days and 12 hours actually end on Friday afternoon. A scenario where the child was born on Friday night, so 12 hours later, Friday morning or Friday afternoon, you're able to do the pidyon. The Shach says, rather than wait until Sunday, better to do the pidyon after those 29 days and 12 hours, because again, that is really the critical time frame that is necessary. And he notes that when the Shulchan Aruch says wait until Sunday, that's only in a scenario where the 12 hours fall out over the course of Shabbos, and you can't do it beforehand. That's the opinion of the Bach, the Shach. It's all about how old the child is. Note very carefully the time of day that the child was born, the date the child was born, calculate 29 days and 12 hours after that. That's when you could do pidyon. The Magen Avraham, however, argues. If you look at source number 5, the Magen Avraham says, Kasav Abach, the malulo, chav test, yud beis tavshin tzadi gimel b'yom vav, yiftu b'yom vav dehavei chodesh, kakas v'ashach sevkat yud tasham. He quotes the Bach and the Shach that says, like we articulated a moment ago, it's all about 29 days and 12 hours. Now, we're going to confine ourselves to the bold in the Magen Avraham. We're not going to go through his full proof. We'll touch on it a little bit later. But confining ourselves to the bold of the second paragraph, the li nired de'ein lismoch al zeh. Magen Avraham says, I actually think this is incorrect. Rather, tzarech sheyagia liyom lamed aleph. The Magen Avraham says there are no shortcuts. There's no cutting corners and saying, oh, he's old enough to do the pidyon haben. Magen Avraham says you need day 31. And anything short of day 31 is not going to qualify for pidyon haben. So in short, we have a machlokas as to how exactly to calculate the starting point of pidyon haben. Is it based on the age of the child, the Bach, note his time of birth, calculate 29 days and 12 hours, or no? Just like a bris milah, we're not concerned with the time of day that the child was born. It's about halachic calendar. Magen Avraham maintains pidyon haben is about halachic calendar as well. You need to actually reach day 31. Now, what in turn is this machlokas about? I assure you, I promise, that the Bach and the Magen Avraham did not wake up one morning, flip a coin, and decide that it's going to be one way or the other. Clearly, there was some logic driving the machlokas here. There was some internal logic that dictates which position they would take. And I would suggest to you, as I alluded to before, that this in turn hinges on a machlokas rishonim about the entire nature of this day 31 requirement. Now, we're going to look in source number 6. I preface source number 6 by saying the following. The 8th parak of Maseches Bechoros, which is the parak that deals with pidyon haben, often deals with rather tragic circumstances in a kind of removed, divorced, intellectual way. That is often how we study halacha. We need to study what the halacha is, and we kind of extricate ourselves from the human tragedy in the story. We're going to be reading a Mishnah in Bechoros that described a child who is born, a Bechor who is born, and passes away within 30 days. Now, again, we're going to be talking about that in an abstract, emotionally removed way in order to study the halacha. I just offer that preface because it is just worth pointing out that obviously in real life, this is a very difficult circumstance. I always say that one of the most difficult tosos in Shas for me was not a tosos that was difficult because of its complexity. There are certainly many, many difficult tosos in Shas, but it's a tosos on this daf in Maseches Bechoros that discusses a case. We'll see in a moment that if a child lives, let's say 31 days or 32 days, and Nebuch passes away afterwards, the father still has to do pidyon haben. There's still a mitzvah of pidyon haben, even though the child isn't present. And Tosos have two deos as to whether or not the father makes a shechayanu v'kiyamanu v'kiyanu l'zman on that mitzvah of pidyon haben. That's an excruciating Tosos. That's a difficult Tosos. But again, for our purposes, we're going to try to extricate ourselves from the emotional heaviness of these scenarios, and we'll try to discuss it in an abstract way in order to determine the halacha. So what is the scenario described in the Mishnah Bechoros Tabim Testament Aleph? Source number 6. Meisa ben b'sok shloshim yom. Rahman al-Islam, the child passes away within 30 days. Af al pisha nasan lakohen yachzir. So if he already jumped the gun and he gave 5 slams to the Kohen, he shouldn't have done that. But if he did so, the Kohen needs to return them because the child did not make it to day 30. La'achar lamed yom, af al pisha lo nasan yitein. If it's after 30 days, as we just said a moment ago, even if the child passed, there's still a mitzvah of pidyon haben, and the father should do the mitzvah of pidyon haben. Bold. Meis biyom shloshim, kiyom shalafanav. What happens on day 30? So you've said if it was before day 30, then the Kohen needs to return the money. If it was after day 30, then even if the child predeceased the pidyon still needs to take place. What about day 30 itself? Meis biyom shloshim, kiyom shalafanav. Rabbi Akiva Omer im nasan lo yitov im lo nasan lo yitin. The first opinion in the Gemara is that day 30 doesn't count. It's like day 29. The second opinion, the opinion of Rabbi Akiva, is we're not really sure. So if he gave it already, then the Kohen can keep it. If he didn't give it, he's not obligated to give it to the Kohen. Rabbi Akiva's stance here is an articulation of what general halachic principle? In other words, we don't know if he's obligated to give it, so just leave the money wherever it is. If the Kohen has it, he need not return it. If the father did not yet give the money, he need not give it. What does Rashi say here? So Rashi in source number 7 says that if the child passed before 30 days, Yaksir, the Kohen, needs to give the money back. Why? Rashi invokes a halachic principle called nefel. What does nefel mean? The term nefel means that if a child passes before 30 days of life, we assume that the child was not fully gestationally developed, and therefore the child really wasn't healthy enough to have a sustained life in the first place. All these discussions, again, parenthetically, remind us of one of the great miracles that Hashem has given us, B'zman hazeh, is just maternal medicine. And the fact that again, Baruch Hashem, women dying in childbirth is much less than it was even just a generation ago or 2 generations ago, and infant mortality rates have gone down significantly as well. But certainly, for almost all of human history, it was not uncommon to have a child that would not make it after the first 30 days. And the halacha says that child, again, is called a nefel, and the assumption is that they were not fully gestationally developed and never healthy enough to actually have a sustained life. So Rashi says implicitly here, why is it that we have this 30-day requirement when it comes to pidyon haben? Where does it come from? Rashi saying, I can very easily connect it to another halachic principle that I'm aware of. What is that halachic principle? The principle of nefel. If the child, again, is not considered healthy enough to live, then you don't have to do a pidyon haben because, after all, the child was not healthy enough to live. Rashi says the reason why you have to wait 30 days is because of the assumption that less than 30 days the child is a nefel. And Rashi articulates this in other places as well. If you look in source number 8, the earlier Mishnah on Maseches Bechoros and Beis, the Mishnah says as follows: Shtei nashim shelo bikru, v'yaldu shnei zacharim. So a man is married to 2 wives before the times of Rabbeinu Gershom, and he has 2 firstborn sons. No saying yud slaim lakohen. He gives 10 slaim to the Kohen, 5 for each child. Meis echad mehem b'soch shloshim yom. If Nebuch, one of the children, dies within the first 30 days, the Kohen should indeed give back chamesh slaim. And once again, Rashi doubles down. What does Rashi say? In Lakohen echad nasan. In Lakohen echad nasan ha'ab pidyon shnehem yaksir lo hey slaim holu meis b'soch lamid. If he gave the Kohen 10, he deserves 5 back because Rahman al-Atlan, one of the children, passed within 30 days. And then in bold, Rashi says, "Ve'iglai milsa dineifelhu ushalokedin shakal." And you see retroactively that this child that predeceased the 30-day mark was an nefel. He was never healthy enough to live, and therefore the father does not have to do pidyon haben. According to Rashi, what is this 30-day marker's significance? Why is it important? It is important regarding the viability of the child. Is this child a nefel or is he not? By contrast, Tosfos offer an entirely different view. In source number 10, Tosfos say as follows: Meis beno b'soch shloshim yom, yachzir lo hey slaim. Pirish b'kontris b'shum de nefel hu. Why does Rashi say there's no obligation of pidyon haben before 30? Because the child was a nefel. Tosfos in bold, source number 10, say, uvechinam pirish kain. Rashi really didn't need to invoke this halachic principle of nefel. Da'afilu kimlan be dekalu lo chadashav b'ven chodesh halarachmana. Even if we knew definitively that the child was fully healthy at the point of birth, you still would have no obligation before day 31. What are Tosfos saying here? Tosfos are saying that day 31 conceptually has nothing to do with the concept of nefel. Rashi draws this parallel between these two concepts, Nafel on the one hand and Pidyon Ben on the other. But Tosfos say, I'll give you another good reason why you need to wait until day 31. You know what that reason is? Why you need to wait day 31? Irrespective of Nafel considerations. Why do you have to? Because the Torah tells you, wait until day 31. Just like the Torah told you, wait until day 8 for Bris Milah, that has nothing to do with Nafel. The Torah tells you, wait until day 31 before you do the mitzvah of Pidyon Ben. The Torah also tells you that at 13, the Torah Shabbat Peh tells us that at 13 he's a bar mitzvah, and there are all sorts of other milestones over the course of a child's life. But not all of that has to do with Nafel. Yes, Rashi, here there happens to be confluence between the terminus, the point that the Torah identified for Pidyon Ben, and the point of Nafel. They both happen to occur on day 31. But conceptually, there is no connection between the two. Even a perfectly healthy child, who the doctors assert definitively is fully healthy and properly developed, that child too will only have an obligation on day 31. What is our machlokas conceptually here? Again, what is day 31 about? Is it about the development of the child and determination of the child's health and viability? Or is it simply a time marker identified by the Torah, entirely unrelated to the child's developmental health and the like? What would be a nafka mina between these two views? So first, Tosfos already identify one, which is the question of kalu lo chadasha. If you look, skip for a moment, source number 14, the Radvaz presents the following scenario. Sha'alta mimeni, Reuven shenolad lo ben bechor, v'amar kimli b'gavei shekalu lo chadasha. There's a guy, Reuven, and he's a world-class expert OBGYN, and he looks at the child, and he says, I know definitively that this child is developmentally perfect. Goon shapirish b'menu, hulat shalem b's'aro b'tziparnav, upado oso b'so shloshim yom im upado yolam. So Reuven says, because I know definitively that this child is properly gestationally developed, I want to do my pidyon at the bris. We'll do a 2-for-1. I'll save myself some money. We'll do it on day 8. And don't worry about day 30 because I know that this child is healthy. Can you fulfill the mitzvah that way or can you not? Now, what would we say conceptually? According to Rashi, the answer is maybe. Because again, according to Rashi, it's all about determining whether the child is healthy or not. Can you do so according to Tosfos? Absolutely not, because the Torah gave you a marker of day 30. The Radvaz says, Tshuva, ein benopadoi v'abrachi levatala. He says, that was, again, it was very creative of you. Again, it was a nice cost-saving measure. But you didn't fulfill the mitzvah. It was a bracha levatala. She'ein ha'tam shel shloshim yom k'dei she'yitzei mitoras nefel, k'dei she'nomar di kimle b'gavesh kol lo chadash v'yitzei mitoras nefel. It's not about just determining the health of the child. Ella gzeras ha'kosavhu t'chsiv ufbiyomi ben chodesh tefteh. The Radvaz adopts the view of Tosfos that the Torah says day 30. Just like it says day 8 for Milah, it says day 30 for Pidyon, and there are no shortcuts. You can't do it early. That would be one nafka mina. The second nafka mina that's discussed in sources 11 through 13 is the case of nitraf b'sok lamed yom. Another, again, tragic case that we just present as a theoretical. We won't go through all the sources inside. What about a case of nitraf b'sok lamed yom? That means the child passes within 30 days, but not due to natural causes. There's some kind of accident. Or again, back in the olden days, they talk about nitraf literally being a child was snatched by wild animals. Again, a scenario that's almost inconceivable in modern society, but evidently did exist at some point in human history. So what about then? So the child passed before the 30-day mark, but it didn't succumb to natural causes. For all intents and purposes, the child could have been perfectly healthy. So are you chayiv in pidyon ben or not? In this instance, Rashi may again say, you're chayiv in pidyon ben. The child was perfectly healthy. The 30-day marker is simply a determinant of the health and well-being and viability of the child. Tosfos, by contrast, who say it is objectively about day 30, would claim that the father is exempt. In the end of the day, we do paskin that he is exempt. How Rashi accounts for that, we're not going to get into right now. That would potentially be another nafka mina. Another nafka mina that also comes up in the Radvaz is almost the opposite of the case that we saw in source number 14. Because this was all on short notice, I confess to you that I was not able to find this tshuva of the Radvaz inside, but I will share it with you as I remember it from my recollection. The Radvaz was asked the following case. So if source number 14 was a case where the father was trying to do it early, the Radvaz was also asked about a case where a family decided they wanted to push off a pidyon and do it late. Why did they want to push off the pidyon? Some things, I guess, never change. They wanted to push it off to a Sunday. Why did they want to push it off to a Sunday? Because then they could have everybody and it would be a big thing and they would have lots of fancy food. It would be a great seuda. So they wanted to push it off to a Sunday. One of my favorite Pidyon Ben stories, I know I've shared from the pulpit before, so those who have heard this story, I apologize for the repetition. But many, many years ago, I was giving a shiur on Pidyon Ben, and I had a congregant. His name is Dimitri. He's a very fine Jew, and he shared with me the following story about his own Pidyon Ben. He said that he grew up in the former Soviet Union and didn't know anything from Torah mitzvos like many Soviet Jews. And then the Iron Curtain fell. He was a teenager when the Iron Curtain fell, and he started to study Judaism and to learn more. But he had never heard of this mitzvah called Pidyon Ben. He was a firstborn, never heard of Pidyon Ben. So he was working as a waiter in a Hasidic summer camp. He did not identify which summer camp it was. And he was working as a waiter. And over the course of, again, either learning or overhearing, he heard them talking about this mitzvah Pidyon Ben. And he realized that he never had a Pidyon Ben. So he starts asking questions. What is this mitzvah? It's a firstborn, no C-section, no previous miscarriage. He's going through all the halachos, and he realizes he has a mitzvah to do Pidyon Ben. If a young man is bar mitzvah, and for whatever reason his father was unable to do Pidyon Ben, he has a mitzvah to redeem himself. So he says, I have a mitzvah Pidyon Ben. So they sit down with him and they say, Taka, you're right. Yeah, you have a mitzvah Pidyon Ben. So they say to him, okay, next week we're going to do your Pidyon Ben. So he says, okay, but if I could just ask a question, he's like, why are we waiting a week? It's 30 days. I'm already 30 days old. I'm a little more than 30 days old. Why are we waiting a week? And they just said, oh, we'll do it next week. We'll do it next week. He's like trying to figure out why they're waiting a week. And then ultimately he realizes that the next week was the 9 days and they wanted to make a camp-wide barbecue. So they needed an excuse to push it off for a week. So they used his Pidyon Ben instead of a siyum, save somebody having to learn extra chas v'shalom. So they used his Pidyon Ben as a siyum as a sudas mitzvah for the entire camp. Can you do that? Can you push it off? Needless to say, the Radvaz was not particularly happy with those who were just pushing it off in order to invite more friends and have a fancier su'uda. Why not? The Radvaz felt it really must be done on day 31. Now, how do we assess that? Now, this could be just a general expression of a principle that we have called Zrizin Makdim and Lemitzvos. Mitzvah Habali Yadfal Tachmin Sena. In general, we don't like to push off mitzvahs. But I would suggest that another layer to all of this could very much be our discussion of the nature of Lamed Yom. If 30 days is just a marker to determine the health and viability of the child, is there anything special about day 31 itself? There's nothing special about day 31. Again, it just happens to be the point at which we can confidently assert that this child is healthy. But in theory, if we could do it earlier, great. And in theory, if the pidyon is going to happen later, no big deal. There's no special status to day 31. If day 31 is the day designated by the Torah as the day for Pidyon Ben, just like day 8 is the day designated for Mila by the Torah, then there's special status to day 31, and you should not be pushing off later. The Radvaz, who Lishitasa, we saw in source number 14, he didn't buy the idea that this is just about assessment of viability. He felt that it's really about day 31, so he holds you cannot do it earlier, and he holds it would be halachically problematic to do it later as well. And bringing all this back to our original shaila, what about doing it at night? The minhag of specifically doing a Pidyon Ben in the morning came from the fact that if you have these 12 hours, it can often get very, very confusing, and you need to be super, super careful in determining when Pidyon Ben begins. Why? Because if a child is born towards the very end of the day, then those 12 hours extend all the way until the middle of day 30. So the poskim say, you know what? We don't want to get started with this. You might not know the exact time of birth. Determining exact time of birth halachically is not always the exact moment that is written down on a birth certificate. It's not necessarily the same determinant. When does that actually become important? It becomes important when a baby boy is born on, most complicated time for a baby boy to be born, Friday afternoon. Friday afternoon. Was it before Shkia? Was it after Shkia? Was it before Tzeis? Was it after Tzeis? That's when it becomes very, very confusing. And a Moel won't go near any of that stuff. If there was even a concern, if the child was born on Bein Hashmashos, they'll do the bris on Sunday rather than doing it on Shabbos. So it becomes very difficult to determine the exact time of birth. It can very easily lead to confusion. So the poskim said, just wait until morning of day 31. Some suggest maybe even wait until afternoon of day 31. Just make sure that you've cleared that metric in order to have it done. That is why halacha l'maisa, we wait until the day of 31 rather than the night of 31. In this particular instance that I was dealing with last night, we went through the time of birth, we discussed it, and it was very clear that as long as the pidyon was going to be done later in the evening, not at Shkia time, but later in the evening, we would have competently covered those 29 days and 12 hours. And that, in essence, was the shaila. Given that we have covered it, and there is a counter pressure, there's reasons, familial reasons, to do it the night before, can we disregard the general minhag and practice of doing it in the morning in order to accommodate the family and do it the night before? And that was essentially the machlokas between Rav Willig and Rav Tendler. Rav Tendler felt that once we have this minhag, it's minhag Yisrael, and you don't deviate from minhag Yisrael unless there are super extenuating circumstances. And Rav Willig felt that it is indeed minhag Yisrael, but if you've actually cleared the concern that served as the source for the minhag, and you have cleared those 29 days and 12 hours, then there is permission to, there's license to actually make the pidyon at night. So in the end of the day, I think we were Yosei according to both opinions. If this is all about the viability of the child, then you just need to make sure that the child has cleared that 1 month mark, 29 days and 12 hours, like the box suggested, and the child indeed cleared that parameter. And if it's about objective halachic days, it's just about doing day 31, like the Magen Avraham said, then once we hit evening, halachically speaking, evening marks the beginning of day 31, and we covered that metric as well. Let me close with one final conceptual point that is a subtle one halachically, but I think opens up a much broader hashkafic conversation in terms of this whole mitzvah of Pidyon Haben. I would submit to you, let me take a step back. We started with a machlokas achronim about how you determine day 30 as far as Pidyon Haben goes. Is it just the child being alive for 29 days and 12 hours, or is it measured by halachic calendar day 31? We next suggested that in turn is based on a machlokas among the Rishonim. According to Rashi, the 30-day mark is all about viability, in which case we would measure it by the age of the child. The halakhic calendar is irrelevant for viability. It's all about the age of the child, 29 days and 12 hours. Whereas, according to Tosfos, it's all about day 31 based on halakhic calendar, in which case we'd agree with the Magen Avraham that it's not about how old the child is, it's about getting to day 31 on the halakhic calendar. So we have a machlokas achronim that is in turn based on a machlokas rishonim. I would suggest to you that it's possible that this machlokas rishonim is in turn based on a discrepancy within the Torah HaKadosha itself, within the psukim of the Torah. And here there is, again, a lot more to talk about, but very briefly, and in the most general sense, I will note the following. I said at the outset that the Torah presents the mitzvah of Pidyon Haben in several different places in the Torah itself. And again, even the sources that you have in 15 and 16 are certainly a non-exhaustive list. There are at least 3 or 4, depending on how you count, places in the Torah that mention this mitzvah of Pidyon Haben. One major demarcation point between them, one major discrepancy between the different presentations of the mitzvah is the verb that the Torah uses to describe the mitzvah. If you look in source number 15, which is where we started, the Torah says, and again, any firstborn is yours. What's the verb here? Pado tifteh. Es bechor ha'adam, ves bechor ha'behema tme'ah tifteh. But redeem the child. That is the mitzvah. We call it Pidyon Haben. Pado tifteh. Redeem the child. But a different word is used in source number 16. Source number 16, we have a pasuk that says, Elohim lo sekalel, or Elokim lo sekalel. There are 2 different ways to read that. The word Elohim can mean a ruler or leader, or, of course, the word Elokim can refer to Hashem, and both interpretations are offered in this pasuk. I will read it, Elohim lo sekalel, v'nasiva amacha lo sa'or. Don't curse judges or leaders of the nation. And then, Malay ascha v'dimacha lo se'acher. Do not delay the proper delivery of your meiser and truma, etc. B'chor banecha titenli. Give me your firstborn child. Is that the same as the word tifteh? I mean, it's certainly not. It's a different word. But more importantly, not only is it a different word, it's almost an opposite word. When you redeem something, you're taking something. I'm giving 5 slime to the Kohen, and what am I doing? I'm taking my child back. When we say B'chor banecha titenli, that means give me your firstborn child. And of course, you don't literally give the child, but in essence, we have a total dramatic reimagination of this whole ceremony of Pidyon Haben. What are you doing? You're not redeeming the child, but symbolically, you are giving the child to Hashem. Again, you're not doing it in the form of the child himself. You're doing it in the form of money, but you're handing over this child to the Ribono Shel Olam, just like you give over your first fruits in the mitzvah of Bikurim. And just like you give over your first animals in the mitzvah of what we call Bechor Behema Tahora, you give over this child as well. Two almost opposite interpretations of what exactly is happening here. And I think that our entire question may hinge on this as well. And again, the halachic point here is a little bit more nuanced, so I'll make the point quickly and then we'll move to the hashkafic point. But I think that this might determine what exactly the significance of Yom Shloshim is. We noted at the outset that the word erkecha comes up by, if you look back at source number 15 on the second line, in the context of Pidyon Ben. The word erkecha, does anyone know, where do we ordinarily associate that word with? I heard a number of people say it, with Erech. Erechin is a whole area of halakha where different people at different ages are given almost seemingly arbitrary values. Of course, it's not arbitrary, it's divinely mandated, but these different values that if you say, oh, I'm giving that person's value to the Beis HaMikdash, the Torah says, here is the value that you give. When a child is 30 days, what is that child's value? At that point, you're giving 5 sla'im over. It is almost akin to Erechin. And their 30 days is not necessarily linked to the child's viability. It's about the child's age categories, the different age categories vis-a-vis Erechin that the Torah dictates. By contrast, when it comes to Bechor Banecha Titen Li, giving a child is similar to giving a Bechor Behema Tahora, giving an animal to Hashem. And again, we know that when it comes to giving Karbanos Kiviyachal, if we're drawing a loose comparison, we need to make sure that the Karban is a proper, viable Karban, free of bumin, it's healthy, that it's able to serve its role in the Beis HaMikdash, as opposed to an animal that is incomplete. So perhaps this entire machlokes in Rashi and Tosfos is in turn built on this question in the Psukim themselves. Now, in a broader hashkafic sense, allow me to say the following. I think there is indeed a tension between these two presentations of the mitzvah. What am I doing? Just again, I'm doing the mitzvah Pidyon Ben. What should I have in mind when I approach this mitzvah? Am I taking my child back, Pidyon? That's certainly how we generally conceive of it. We call it Pidyon Ben. Again, we do have this dialogue. My Beis Tvei, the Kohen asks, which one do you want? It's kind of constructed, the choreography is constructed as a kind of swap one for the other. And yet we have this pasuk, and mind you, of Bechor Banecha Titen Li. We have this pasuk of giving a child to Hashem. And mind you, there's a machlokes rishonim as to which of the psukim is primary in presentation of this mitzvah. The Rambam, when he presents this mitzvah, chooses source number 16. He chooses the pasuk that says, Bechor Banecha Titen Li. Give me your child. I humbly submit to you that on a hashkafic level, when we do the mitzvah Pidyon Ben, we are doing both. We are doing both simultaneously. And as opposite as they may seem, as much as they seem to exist in surface tension with one another, we are precisely declaring that they are not contradictory when we do this mitzvah Pidyon Ben. On one level, Pidyon Ben is indeed primarily a pidyon. I am taking this child, I'm declaring ownership of this child, I'm taking responsibility for this child. I am saying that this child is not going to go to the Kohen and the Mikdash like Shmuel HaNavi. This child is going to come home, into our Mikdash Ma'at. But even as we do that, as Jewish parents, we simultaneously recognize that that responsibility comes with a sacred charge. When we take this child home, we simultaneously declare that we are devoting this child to you, Hashem. And that our primary goal in raising this child is not for our own benefit, it's not for our own nachas, it's not just to attend Chumash plays and to go to Hanukkah parties. We're doing it because there's a broader goal in mind, of perpetuating our Masorah, of continuing Klal Yisrael, and making sure that this child too will be devoted to you. And I will close with this. This I've definitely shared with some of you before, so once again, I apologize for Chazara, but I'll share with you just very personally how this idea of Pidyon Ben is very acute for me and my family. Just recently, my brother made a Pidyon Ben for my nephew, Joseph. And it was the first Pidyon Ben in this generation. As I said before, I did not make a Pidyon Ben. My wife, Rina, is a Bas Levi. So even though I have a firstborn son, we did not make a Pidyon Ben. My brother in Eretz Yisrael, his oldest is a girl, my niece Yonina. So he did not make a Pidyon Ben either. This was the first Pidyon Ben in this generation. And Pidyon Bens have special significance within our family. Why do they have such special significance? My brother spoke about this at the Pidyon Ben. There's a special bowl that we use in our family to carry every child for a Pidyon Ben. I was carried in it 36 years ago, 36 years minus 30 days. I was carried in that bowl, and my nephew was carried in that bowl as well. And for us, it's not just a bowl. Again, lots of times they use fancy dishes to put jewelry and the like. But for us, it carries a sentimental significance that goes far beyond its weight in silver. The story goes that my great-grandmother in Europe, in Belgium, decided to take the family out of Belgium. She realized what was coming. She realized what was happening. My great-grandfather really wanted to stay. Life was good. He had a very successful diamond business. He was in Antwerp. Many of the Jews were in the diamond industry in Antwerp. And he wanted to stay. And my great-grandmother was trying to convince him to leave, really trying to convince him. And at a certain point, she felt it's now or literally never. And she said to him, we're going. That's it. Like, I'm taking the kids and we're going. You can stay if you want, but we're going. And faced with that ultimatum, he finally left. They left in June of 1940, for context, for those who know a little World War II history. So we're talking literally weeks or months before the Nazis, weeks or maximum a month before the Nazis took over Belgium. And they ran. They ran by foot. They made it to the French countryside through Nice and Flows. They managed to get out on one of the very last boats. Again, that's a whole story that I may have shared in the past. One of the last boats leaving the European continent. Again, Mamish Nice and Flows, and they got out. Before the journey happened, and I heard the story from my father. Mind you, this is my mother's side of the family, but he recalls hearing it from my great-grandmother. She took my grandmother, who was young, she was 8 years old at the time, and she took the family silver, and they went to a bridge over a river, I guess somewhere in Antwerp. I don't know where exactly it was. And they threw their silver off the bridge. My grandmother's like, what in the world is happening here? Like, what are you doing? And she said, my great-grandmother, that I'd rather the water have our silver than the Nazis have our silver. She got rid of all of their silver. She kept one piece. The only piece she kept was that bowl that we now carry the next generation of Jewish children in. And again, I was not old enough to ask her when she was still, with us and when she was still mentally acute. But I happen to know, I'm nearly certain that bowl was used for Pidyon HaBen ceremonies already in Europe. It wasn't just like a soup bowl that we started using as a Pidyon HaBen here. It was used for Pidyon HaBen ceremonies in Europe. And I have to guess, again, I can't say it definitively, I never asked her, but I have to guess that was a deliberate choice on part of my great-grandmother. That it wasn't just a piece of silver. It was a piece of silver that symbolized continuity of Am Yisrael. The fact that Jews will continue to give their children to Hashem, to continue to perpetuate our Masorah, our values, even as we take the child home, we make sure that they are going to carry the values forward. And come what may, whatever challenges come, the greatest challenges in all of Jewish history, Pidyon HaBen and all that it symbolizes, it will continue. And we will continue to perpetuate the next generation of Am Yisrael. So may we be zocha to celebrate many more Pidyon HaBens together. They're pretty rare, but even if we can't celebrate them in a literal sense, whether it be during the day or at night, let us celebrate the values that Pidyon HaBen represent, and let us indeed commit ourselves to further continuity of the Masorahs of Am Yisrael.